I am Joshua K. Sabra, Esquire, and he is Dr. Miles Salisbury. And you are listening to the Miles Ahead podcast, where we share tactics, techniques, and protocol to improve your physical, mental, and spiritual health while you walk the path of the warrior. Stay tuned. On today's episode, Dr. Miles and I interview Evan Transue, a podcaster, public speaker, author of the book Overcoming Mental Health Challenges. And we discuss how he was able to turn his life around, which is a dramatic tale and very exciting. We ask him lots of questions about that. And we also talk about how he works with people moving forward. It's an exciting episode, lots of ahas, lots of golden nuggets. So stay tuned. And we're live with Doctor. See, I didn't even get your title. How do we refer to you, sir?
I'd love to be a doctor, but I always my alter ego is Detective Ev, but really I'm just a health coach, health practitioner. So I know my place with it. I'm not a doctor, not a scientist, just very interested in this stuff and have a personal story.
Perfect.
Yeah, you sound like a good synergy with mental health and physical health, which is basically our podcast. So you're like the perfect guest for us. So this is gonna be great.
So, hey, Evan, you have a compelling story that we got a chance to read a little bit about you before you hopped in. But why don't you give our listeners the short 5-minute version of how you got into this field and becoming a health detective and also a public speaker.
Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. And as most people in this space, especially if they're doing it professionally, can relate to, you don't think about this at 5 years old. I was not 5 telling my parents when they asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up. I want to be a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. That never crossed my mind, nor did public speaking. But these experiences throughout life led to that passion. So I started dealing with health symptoms, both physical and mental, at around 5 years old. And I'm 28 now, going to be 29 soon. So, it sounds crazy to say it, but it's like, that's 23 years ago. And I always remind people of that, though, so that they can think about where the state of health in the world was 20 years ago, especially regarding mental health and stigmas around it and all that stuff. And so I have 2 great parents, love me to death. They're not college educated. They don't have any advanced degrees or something. So they didn't have a deep understanding of this. They obviously did the best that they could to keep my sister and I healthy. But when I started presenting with symptoms, they did the only thing they knew what to do. They took me to a doctor. And this doctor was well-meaning, good person that I still know to this day, actually. And what happened there was literally the one singular thing that probably led to everything else happening over the next 13 years after that. And it was him saying that the panic attacks I was dealing with, which I did get formally diagnosed with later, same symptoms, but it was not diagnosed at the time, were not panic attacks. It's not that he was denying it. He just didn't have an answer for it. My parents had never heard the term panic attacks. Neither had I. He said, this isn't something to worry about. Evan's going to outgrow this. Right now, he just gets a little too worked up. Everything's going to be okay. Well, 5-year-old logic, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old logic. I realized that I was getting worse. I never got better. And my logic at the time from being a kid was that if smart doctor can't figure it out, right? Because we understand that from a very young age, hierarchies in life and status and all that. I knew this was an intelligent person. If they can't figure it out, I must be the problem. So I had the insight to know that that's a smart person. I didn't have the emotional intelligence and otherwise necessary skills to realize that they are still fallible human beings, just like all of us. And so the worse that the symptoms got, the more I developed the idea I can't talk to people about this. And that obviously is not a great thing. And so the summarized version is that by the time I was 15, so this is a full decade almost of these symptoms progressing, it got so bad that I couldn't just keep repressing it, show up to school, still do well and show face or save face. I was needing coping mechanisms. I needed help, but I didn't get that help. So I got coping mechanisms instead. And the things that I turned to were drugs and alcohol. I don't mean to be too typical of a story, but it's kind of exactly what you think. It's starting with simpler stuff like marijuana and alcohol, things that most of my friends were doing at that point. And then very quickly, I became the one with the biggest problem, even though I was one of the last friends in the group to really start doing this stuff. So they could limit it to the weekends. But that to me was the only sense of relief I had gotten at all in 10 years. And so that became my coping mechanism. And rapidly, that set of issues progressed into much harder drugs to the point I couldn't afford the amount that I was doing every single day. Like I couldn't even scrounge up the money for it. So I started selling the drugs myself. And just to paint the picture, I was like the nerdiest kid in the world at one point, teacher's pet, telling on kids if they talked when the teacher left the room. Like I sucked, man. And I'm going from this 30 straight A kid, probably could have done anything he wanted to in life except athletics. And now I'm selling drugs to support my own habits. So it was quite a shift. And it was during the healing stage of all of this. I kind of had this powerful moment at 18 that woke me up. I call it my aha moment, like, aha, I get it now. I need to go do something different. That's what sparked all the healing stuff. So I feel like I'm already at 5 minutes there, roughly, Josh. So we could dive deeper into it, but I'll pause there for a second.
Well, man, this is there's like this lined with gold. This story so far, and I want to get into the pivot point because that's a big thing, and many people find their rock bottoms much later in life, and the fact that you were sensitive enough to that at 18 is you're a fast learner in a lot of ways. But the thing that I just point out, to that thing that the thing that you underlined with the experience you had with a doctor not knowing what's wrong with you, and then the mistake is, giving an optimistic, this is all going to go away soon. This will get better over time, and everyone internalizing that. And then when that didn't prove to be true, there's not something wrong with this diagnosis or this prognosis. There's something wrong with me, right? Then you get into shame, and without coping mechanisms, you turn to recreational drugs. And it's like they say that people who utilize violence have a limited vocabulary. People who utilize drugs and alcohol have a limited suite of coping mechanisms. And to the point that you also mentioned, people will do whatever it takes to cope, and you were willing to do that. So just, man, there's a lot of deep stuff here. Miles, what do you got?
Yeah, I always see addiction's like there's a sliver of health in there too. You're just trying to feel better, at the end of the day. Like there's some wisdom there. It's just the blast radius obviously is not good. But to the listener, like just because there's an addiction going on doesn't mean you're inherently bad. You're just trying to feel better. And what stuck out to me is you started having panic attacks at 5. That must have been really terrifying. I mean, I see people having like teenage years to 20 to 30 at 5. I've not come across that. That must have been really scary.
It was confusing. Yeah, and the word crazy definitely became a main focus in my consciousness for most of my life because, again, especially if you don't know the symptoms of it, right? Because it gets misused a lot, I think, even on social media. So for those listening that might not understand what it actually is, even though I'm not a doctor, something you could look up on Google very easily or WebMD. I mean, you do get these feelings of impending doom. You could disassociate a little bit. It actually feels like you are going to die. So to me, the only conclusion that I could come to after, again, even 5 years, let alone 10 years of dealing with this stuff, is if I could be otherwise normal 1 second, and then for roughly, usually for me, about a 20-minute period, I am positive I'm going to die, even though I've dealt with this a million times before and it's never killed me. And then it's not that I'm fine afterwards, but I'm calm and I'm more drained than anything, but I'm aware that I'm not in that state anymore. The only word for that, if there wasn't a diagnosis, was crazy. Because how could I think I'm going to die 1 second and then be good in 20 minutes? And it happens over and over. And every single time I believe it, that just seems crazy to me.
Yeah. That's completely overwhelming.
Mhm.
Was listening to you and other podcasts before, and you said you grew up in a perfectly normal family, no trauma, things felt good. So this must have been extra confusing because you couldn't really pin it on, hey, I was being bullied or abused at home. What do you feel it was a lot of nature or like neurobiological aspects happening for you? Is there some genetic component and you can bring in your knowledge of physical health or maybe that maybe exacerbated a epigenetic component here? Or do you think there was some, I mean, you probably had this question before.
Well, yeah, but it's a powerful one for people to hear the answer to because everyone relates to this stuff differently. The answer is absolutely yes. I do think by the time people are actually having aha moments or getting help, everything's mixed in. So even if there really was not any significant trauma prior to me dealing with this stuff, certainly the way that I dealt with it and the experiences that I had with it created its own trauma. So you're still dealing with both things for a lot of people anyway. I think the common narrative is that trauma precedes the issues. But as someone who works in this space, I still believe actually that is the majority of people. I've seen people and talked to them who actually are very similar to me. There's my friend Courtney, and she shares her story publicly. It's at Courtney Hayes, I think, on Instagram. She literally lived 25 minutes from me. We never met till much later in life, same age. And she was also dealing with these symptoms at a very young age. And I think it was like 6 or 7, she started dealing with this. Different story because her mom knew a lot about psychology. Actually, I think she was a counselor and then they got on medication and stuff. So different set of problems. But I 100% believe that and would even go as far as to say that I know it because I focus on the mental health stuff a lot. But the truth of the matter is there's several physical health conditions I was diagnosed with by 18. They were just the least of my worries at that time. And all of these things got better simultaneously when I started getting into what you could call natural medicine or more functional medicine. And so when I saw all of these things getting better at once, I'm like, how on earth could 7 things, because that's how many diagnoses I had, how could those all be getting better at once? And it's not that I don't believe the diagnoses, I do, but I believe once you start getting to these extreme numbers, it's really just a representation and manifestation of the same core problems. And your body's
Yeah.
just saying over and over again, hey, you didn't fix it. You didn't fix it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
so
Oh, go ahead.
no, it's very astute. No, that the if you have something out of balance in your world in your life, like there can be many manifestations of those things, and the further out of balance, the further on the dysfunctional end of the spectrum that you're going to present. And I feel like a lot of diagnoses are just names for that end of the spectrum.
Absolutely. So the thing that kind of triggered into the natural health, I'll go into that if I can, is because you said I learned fast, but the truth of the matter is, I think it was just such a quick succession of punches, if you will, figurative punches, of course, that there was almost no other logical conclusion to come to than something needs to change. So I made it 17 days into my senior year of high school, 17 days just coming off summer, and I got kicked out. And it was for something involving drugs. It wasn't actually a physical altercation, but it was threats and violence, perceived violence around drug stuff. So it never would have happened without that. And within a matter of 3 weeks, I got arrested, sent to a juvenile detention facility. So again, nerdy, good kid. Thank God I went to like the safest juvie in the world. I mean, this thing, the food was literally better than the stuff I had at school. I was never worried, but it sucked. It's still scary overall. I spent my 18th birthday on house arrest because I turned 18 my birthday's in September. So this all happened in the same stretch. And I got kicked out of school. And I never, of all the things, it was so funny as I was getting in trouble, I never actually thought about that I wouldn't be going back to school until that was finally laid out for me. And I said, oh, wow. So all these consequences happen, but that was just like the jab cross. It wasn't the final hook yet. And so the jab cross was all that stuff. And I went immediately back to the coping mechanisms that I knew, which were drugs, because now I'm under the most stress I've ever been under.
Yeah.
And so again, I cannot stress this enough because I never want people to get the wrong perception here, nor am I just defending them, but I want accuracy in stories. My parents are attentive people that cared. It's just when you are using drugs and you're trying to keep it away from people, anyone that's experienced this with someone in their life that does this, we are going to make sure you don't know, or we're going to do our best to trick you. It's not about how good or bad the parenting is. Certainly bad parenting wouldn't help, but you can get away with this stuff if you want to. So I get on house arrest within 3 days. I'm sneaking onto a computer, messaging someone that I knew that I used to sell to, and they owed me a favor. So I said, hey, you don't owe me this favor, but you drop off this to the end of my parents' driveway at 2 a.m. Done. Right? Like it's crazy the stuff that happens. So I am now doing drugs on house arrest. No one suspects it because my parents lived more not even suburban, it was more like rural. So no one thought this could be a possibility, not even thinking about it. And I'm doing this at 2 or 3 in the morning on house arrest. So I continue this for another few months. I get off house arrest, get onto probation. And the problem for my probation officer and my parents was that I turned 18 within 2 weeks of being on probation. So legally, I'm on juvenile probation, but now you're also legally an adult. And from my understanding of how they explained it, it's a very hard position for them because they know the second that you're off of this, you're going to reintegrate with the world in a way that you've never been involved with before. So again, not trying to make anyone sound stupid, like things looked good in the moment because no one believed I was doing this stuff. And I wasn't even telling anyone. Only people that knew that were the people that were dropping it off. My close friends did not know I was doing this. And so they wanted the counselor and probation officer specifically wanted me to be doing things that were adults like, but with some restrictions. So, like, believe it or not, 3 months later, I was allowed to go out on New Year's Eve, but I had to be picked up at 12 o'clock when my parents were coming home. And of course, you're not supposed to be doing drugs. And they figure if you're getting picked up, you wouldn't. So I go out on New Year's Eve. 10 minutes in, I'm doing drugs and drinking. It was so arrogant and delusional at the time that I believed I could get away with anything. And mostly delusional. It's not that I actually was like, oh, yeah, I'm one-upping them. It was never about that.
Right.
And I get picked up at 12. And we get in the car. We, as myself and my high school girlfriend. People sometimes ask. I'm not going to mention her name. There's no reason for that right now. But I had convinced her to do a lot of the same things I did that night, except she wasn't into that stuff in the same way that I was. She did it, but not in that way.
Right.
So I could hide this stuff. She couldn't.
Gotcha.
And we get about 30 seconds into the car ride, and they know what's up. They're screaming at her. They stop the car. It was like beyond dramatic moment, but they never yelled at me. And at some point, I began to process in this moment that I'm like, oh my God, do they really not think it's me doing this? Do they think it's her? And I'm like, is she going to get scared and rat me out? Couldn't blame her. She loved me and had my back. So we end up getting home. I'm sure my parents knew something was wrong. I think now this is a place where, and they'd probably say this if they were here too, now there's some denial to some degree, because why would you not at least check? You know, they can't and don't want to believe that this is possible. And so my solution, though, when we got home, this is the moment that was the hook. This is what changed everything. Was I yelled at my girlfriend in a pretty severe way for getting caught for the thing I made her do, which made perfect sense in the moment that night to me.
Right.
It didn't make sense the next morning when I woke up and she had already left. And this is a girl that very turbulent relationship completely because of me over the last several years. But this was her final straw of saying, like, I can't, like, this is dangerous now. It's a dangerous situation. And it was. That, I don't know if it was the icing on the cake. I don't know if I cared more internally, deep down, about other people than myself. I'm not sure. But I hated that I was capable of treating someone else like that. And that was the final thing for me. And it wasn't perfect after that, to be clear. But that was when all this self-awareness, if you will, it almost felt like this came back, like the floodgates open. And I started to realize I am on drugs, on probation. I am now 18. If I get caught again, I'm not going to juvie. I'm going to jail. And I'm about 140 pounds, 6 feet at the time. That ain't going to be good. You know, I don't care what jail you're in. No matter what's happening there, you don't want to be like that. This is up to me now. This isn't, I got in trouble in class and my parents can call the school or whatever happens and you get out of it. I am responsible for me. And if I make good choices, that can work out well. And if I make bad choices, well, that could affect the rest of my life. So that's what kind of woke me up and got me into this. And then that dedication to figuring out, okay, how do I heal now? I didn't know what that meant, but how do I heal? That's what led me to going to different doctors and actually getting some formal diagnoses, which some people don't like, but for me, that was a good thing. And then trying their treatments and unfortunately realizing it wasn't working is what led me to think outside the box. And thank God I got involved with this natural stuff. And once I saw some progression with that, that's when the passion was developed. When I saw something moving the needle for my health for the first time in 13 years, I'm like, this is it. I just got to figure out how far this can go. And thank goodness it goes pretty far.
Absolutely.
So good, Evan. You've obviously been in that moment a lot for, sharing the turning point with people, young people, your friends, older people, people even older than me, like Dr. Miles. But the what I heard you say is the consequences not just affect me, but the people I care about, and turn me into someone I don't want to be. And that lack of control, and that, like as Miles would put it, the blast radius, that became important to you in a way that maybe it wasn't before. And importantly, you valued yourself in a way that you didn't want to see. You didn't want to have those experiences again. And then you went down this sort of road of curiosity versus control to figure out what was going on with your health. And I have a bunch of health questions for you, but I want to kick it to
Mhm.
Miles if he wants to ask you anything else.
No, actually, I was going to go with it. How your story about how finding about the physical health healed the mental health, because that's such an important component. Whenever I get a new patient in, I'm always asking them, along with the myriad of the general intake questions, like, how's your sleep? How's your diet? How's your exercise? What do you put in your body? Do you supplement? What podcasts do you listen to? Very holistic. So many psychologists, even psychiatrists, don't ask these questions, and it's sort of mind blowing because
Mhm.
it's like in our world sometimes we live here up. Like
Yep.
there's so much here, so much wisdom here that we just ignore, and without that, it's I mean, no wonder we numb out. And one of my mentors and uh, humans that I love so much, Connor Beaton. He's got on the Man Talks podcast. That's his podcast. He always talks about, especially guys, when we reach for substances, we're very emotionally full or emotionally constipated, as he said, and that's one way for us to make it go away. The problem is it doesn't fix the constipation part. But I'm also wondering how much of the physical health that men and women in general are using substances to push that down too. Even I don't want to deal with that, so I'll just check that out as well. I don't know. What are your thoughts on these things?
Yeah, I mean, some of the physical health symptoms that I had, I mean, one of them was severe, awful cystic acne. So certainly using the drugs, like when I took benzodiazepines recreationally, you don't care about anything, let alone that you have cystic acne. So it was a break from that. So I wouldn't say most of the physical symptoms I felt any relief with drugs. It wasn't really something I thought about, but that one definitely would be a physical health symptom where to get a break from not having to think about that
Yeah.
all day from like 9 years old on, that I didn't have cystic acne at 9, to be clear, but I started breaking out at 9. That was, to your point about this before, where it's like the drugs are, or how people use these drugs. It's like, listen, people wouldn't do this if it didn't work for some time. If you picked up a drug and it didn't work the first time, you'd say, oh, this is dumb. I'm not going to do this. No, that's the issue. It did work in the beginning,
Yep.
but then it stopped. But now I need the drug.
Yeah.
So now there's new problems and you just masked the underlying thing. So you still got to deal with those later. You're just delaying that. And usually they get worse while you're delaying it.
Yep.
That's right. And how did you measure success when you were on this original path? So you're 18, you're trying not to detonate your life. What was your metric of success going forward? And like you said, when you got a taste of progress, what were those initial metrics for you?
Mhm. So mental health at one point was something that was a daily battle. So even having a day where I felt optimistic, I mean, I wasn't conscious of it at the time per se. I could just, oh, well, I'm having a good day. Like I wasn't looking for it at that time, but I started to notice these things. So I'm like, wow, this day was like good. I had a positive outlook. I noticed too how much depression tricks people and tricked me, because it would take the same situation and you literally see it from like a glass half empty lens, when really the glass was half full or it was completely full. And so just the shifted perspectives, I'm like, wow, my mood completely dictated the way that I saw this thing. And I do believe that's a skill that we can develop regardless, but certainly my emotions trigger that. So I was like, that's interesting. And then the physical health symptoms, they were much easier to track because, again, my skin looked horrendous at one point. So even a 20% increase in that was a notable jump for me. I'm like, wow, I'm starting to break out less, or I don't see new ones developing. Unfortunately, if you're dealing with cystic acne, I mean, even if you could stop the acne overnight, it takes months sometimes for those to heal and the scars that come with it. So just to see nothing else forming, that was great. The diagnosis that I got at 18 was something called Meniere's disease. That's an inner ear disorder that's characterized by pretty extreme vertigo and progressive hearing loss in one or both ears. And in my case, it would have been one ear. I say would have because I don't have that anymore, which I know some people will argue that. That's fine. I mean, I have the doctor's records, so I can show people this. But besides the point, that one, to not get days where I was having extreme vertigo or seeing that I could manage the vertigo and I could control the triggers where before it was random, all these little things were like light bulbs to me. I'm like, oh, this is great. So in reality, I was still suffering worse than most people, probably, Josh. Not everyone, but most people my age. But just to see these days where, oh, I could pause the symptoms for a few hours, or I can have an optimistic attitude that day. That's all I needed. And I think this is what also, because it ties into mental health, I think this is what also helps people that are having suicidal ideations. They're not looking for a perfect life overnight. They're looking for some hope that this isn't going to last forever. So even though I still felt like crap compared to today, just knowing that I was making progress and that, for the last decade plus, I'm declining. And now even just 5% better I was more energized than most people just because of that inspiration that came from that 5%. So I measured it loosely at first. And then it was like, how much better is my skin? How many days in a row? And not literally tracked. I'm not journaling this, to be clear, but I was keeping an eye on how long do the moods last, the positive moods and negatives. How much clearer does the skin get? What triggers the skin? What triggers the dizziness? Like all those types of things.
Well, that's pretty in-depth. Damn, you pay a lot of attention to yourself. I think you're a good example of the power of having self-awareness and sensitivity to what's going on with you, because the pain is enough motivation to get started, the progress enough motivation to keep going. So just the fact that you had all that kind of awareness, sometimes, I mean, I'm surprised at what people don't notice that's going on with them. So kudos to you. That's I have a bunch more questions, but Miles, you want to jump in or can I keep going?
Um, Mine was, I'm sure you want to talk about your work in schools, which I think is super valuable. And in my field, I'm so grateful that you're doing that. I can't tell you how many patients I work with when they have their aha moments, like, why are we not teaching this in schools? Like over and over and over. I'm like, yeah, I agree. Thank you for doing that, because we have school counselors, but they're all right sometimes. Or what do they really do? You're going in there and you're explaining this and you're starting at kindergarten all the way through high school. Am I right about that? Is that
I historically have done as young as that, just in case anyone does reach out because of this, which I'm always grateful for. I do almost exclusively do high school and early college now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for doing it. Yeah. I think it's super important. So yeah, how did you get started doing that, and how's it going now?
Yeah. Thanks, man. I don't know. Sometimes I look back, like I've just had a weird life where it seems like everything's perfectly connected. So I don't know. I'm grateful for it. But I ended up getting into, very shortly after getting arrested, I got involved in a group of young adults who were highly into personal development. And it's funny because it didn't come from my counselor or anything. I met this person at a local community college that I only went to for a semester and a half. And the only person I met from that got me involved in this group without knowing anything about me or my story. I mean, it's like magic. I don't, it's fate sometimes, it seems.
Yeah.
And that group, it was like a sales group. It's like network marketing, to be honest. I kind of beat around the bush with it because some people don't like that. I'm not in network marketing, but it was good for me, man. They got me reading books. They got me setting goals. That did more for me than any education I got in school, just being honest. So by being involved with that, though, after several months, my mentor, Ben, who I now live like 15 minutes away from in North Carolina, we were all in PA before, he told me one day, like when I walked in, he's like, hey, you're going to give the intro today. Like, because again, people are speaking, trying to sell the stuff. I'm like, intro, I don't do that. Like that's not a thing that I do. But I looked up to him and I really liked him, and he was a few years older than me. So thankfully, my desire to impress these people, because I really liked this group, worked to my benefit in that case, because I was willing to basically do whatever they asked. And thankfully they led me in the right direction. So I got up there and I spoke, and I didn't know how to speak on anything else other than just referencing why I was passionate about what we were doing. Because everyone's pissed that you invited them to a network marketing thing once they realize what it is. So it was genuine for me. I'm like, hey, you guys know, some of you at least in the audience, I wasn't going through such great times a little bit ago. This has really helped me. I got a lot of work to do and a long road to go, but this is why I'm passionate about it. When I say this is literally the way I experienced it. There is no fluff to this. It's not for a story. I went from being terrified of public speaking my whole life to I talked for 3 to 4 minutes, maybe 5 if I was rambling like I do still nowadays, but just with less consciousness around it. Like I just would ramble without thinking. Bam. Intuition, God, whatever you call it, this is what you're supposed to do. I'm like, what? And so that lit a fire. So I had never been motivated to do anything like that career wise, or really anything career wise, honestly. So that focus, though, has now still been here for 10 years. And I ended up getting into it. There's a lot more to the story that's not relevant to this podcast, but just dedicating to practicing it, dedicating it to getting better. And then the way that I actually finally got the quote unquote big break with it was just as lucky or crazy, if not more, than the story I just gave you. So I ended up starting with a nonprofit that had me go speak at a lot of schools locally. And I started independently as well about, a year or two into working with them. That was 7 years ago now or so, 6 years ago. And now I do it fully independently. I still absolutely love that organization and what they do, but you have to graduate from certain things and progress. But it's been one of the biggest blessings ever. And I'm so glad that you understood what I meant about those aha moments, because people that get better, there usually really does seem to be, this is the line. Here's where my life was before. Here's it after. And I don't know how to counsel. I don't know how to be a psychiatrist or psychologist. I do know how to give someone that moment where they can draw the line in the sand.
That's really good. I think it's super hard for us sometimes too. That's mental health practitioners.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, Evan. And it's there's a lot of you saying yes to the moment, in good and bad ways. That could be the subtext of your book. Like,
Right? It was a development of intuition. It's just, I don't know. I never believed in any of that stuff. I was very actually against it. If anything, my whole life, I kind of grew up atheist, not because of parental influence, just because that's how I felt. And there's just certain things that I get that I'm like, that's not a feeling. That's not a thought, like in terms of like a logical, rational thought. It's not an emotion. It's just, I know. It's almost like, and I hope this doesn't sound too far out to any of the listeners, especially because I know your podcast is more directed towards men. The women love this. They get this right away.
Exactly.
It literally, just like I know that my wife's sitting in the other room right now, it is a knowing, like, oh, that's just what I'm supposed to do. Well, how do you know that? I don't know what to tell you. It's implanted. It's like given to me, and you know it and you follow it. And then when it works, you're like, come on. And when it works 10 times, then now I just don't even question it. I'm like, all right, what are we doing next? That's
Exactly.
it.
Yeah. Intuition. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about. How guys, I think we think our way through our emotions. We forget down here below our chin. That's where that intuition lies. And I think you're correct. Women access it a little bit easier than we do. We have it, but we're so taught to be in our heads. But if we go into our bodies more, that's where it is. Or we have moments that thrust us into going into our bodies for that stuff. So that's great. And you do have a book, by the way, Josh was talking about, right? Is that accurate?
I do. It's called Overcoming Mental Health Challenges, How I Resolved 13 Years of Mental Health Issues Naturally. I did that like it was February of 2020. So it's not like some New York Times bestseller. It's a good story. People like it. In the world of public speaking, you're supposed to basically have a book. It's like kind of your business card. It's better than, it's better than like 100,000 Instagram followers. Like that's just what you want. So, I don't know how many it's sold. It's not a lot, like it's under 1,000 to be clear. It's always was used that way, but it's kept on Amazon. If someone's in a terrible situation, because seriously, some people with mental health things are on disability. If you reach out to me on email or something, I literally send you the Kindle version for free. It's just PDF and then you download it. I make $1 on Amazon and then they tax it, or I send it to you for free. I don't really care. It's all good.
That's great. We'll definitely link it in the show notes, and maybe we'll boost the sales for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Evan, I gotta combat you, man. After watching Pommel Horse Guy, I think nerds can accomplish a lot. I think you were selling yourself short on the athletics as a kid. You've got a lot of untapped potential. That was the only criticism I had so far from your backstory. But no, man, that's awesome. So you got kind of shot into a different trajectory in life in terms of helping people. Then somewhere along the way, you became an investigator, and you could tell us about how you found your work and what you're doing with your time right now.
Yep. So pseudo investigator in the sense that it's not a credential, just so audience knows. Got to always dot my I's here, but I call myself Detective Ev, like health detective, because the company that I represent sometimes, Functional Diagnostic Nutrition, it's actually how we got connected here. we look at ourselves as health detectives because it's more advanced than just health coaches. And I have a health coach certification, so it's not saying that there's something wrong with that, but it's definitely more in depth than most health coach programs. But you're not a doctor just because you took an online course. So that line of work came from while trying to solve my own health issues. I had to explore different options. And my mom was actually the first one. She found something called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And she was nice enough to like almost consider that my college. So instead of, I left community college after a semester and a half. IIN was like $5,000. She paid the tuition for that for me. And because she knew I was serious about it. And I'm sitting there on like Friday nights when they released the modules and did it. All she cared about is that I was going to do it and actually like it. So they were very nice to fund that for me, my mom and dad. And I went through that, and then I knew I needed a little more. And so again, these stories, if they sound crazy, the good news is they're all verified. Like you can talk to people in my life and see it. But I ended up leaving Pennsylvania and I went to California shortly after the whole IIN thing because of an intuition, like literally just saying like go out west to find the next step here because I kind of exhausted all the options locally. And I met a woman who was giving a talk at a health store in San Diego, Jen Maleka. And Jen's still a great friend to this day. She actually ended up working with my mom to help her on her own health. And Jen got me involved in functional diagnostic nutrition. And I always loved them. I graduated 7 years ago, always loved representing them in everything that they do. But I reached out in 2020 because the school shut down. And so I was speaking in schools and I was like, holy crap. Like I thought I'm a nonprofit speaking in schools, baby. I'm like, I'm good to go. Like I'm not rich, but I'm good to go. And then that shuts down. I'm like, all right, not as safe as I thought. And so of course I wasn't going to give that up, but I mean, you can't will your way into a school in April of 2020. That doesn't work. There's nothing you can do no matter how good you are. And so I reached out to FDN and the founder asked, said, what can you do? I said, I can speak and I can sell. And he's like, all right, I got something for you. He's like, we need a podcast. You want to start this? So we literally started that podcast almost 4 years ago now. It's called the Health Detective Podcast. And that's what I do for them. I travel to some conferences sometimes too, but mostly it's the podcast and interviewing people who have been through crazy health challenges, things that we're told that this is not curable. This is a permanent thing. You cannot fix this. And they are living proof. Proof can often show you the lab results even before and after that they resolved these things using natural methods. And so I'm just blessed to interview people like that. So that's my work with that now. My wife has the same certification. And so she's actually just on a call with a client and she'll work with them more in depth. I actually don't really work with clients too much nowadays. I'll do the front end stuff like podcasts, or I'll talk to them on the phone and see if they're a good fit. And then she hates all that stuff, but she loves the coaching. So it's a good partnership, but that's what we do.
That's awesome. What are your thoughts on Dr. Joe Dispenza? I know he does something sort of similar, but through meditation in the mind. Is that a crossover for you guys or not really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with him, and I think he's a good person that's trying to do good work. And this is I'm happy to talk about it, but it is a separate conversation. Throughout all of this, actually, in the last few years, not only am I not an atheist, but I'm born again Christian, and so I'm careful about some of the methodologies because I do think they're spiritual in nature, and I don't think those people hide it. I mean, if you listen to some of the stuff that they're saying, they're genuinely asking you to bring in energies and spirits.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to believe in that. That's fine, but you can't deny that that's what they're saying. So I don't personally do that. I think there's scientific validity that shows pretty clearly that what Dr. Dispenza is doing works for healing. So I'm as someone who went from atheist to New Age spiritualism to born again Christian, far be it from me to be arrogant enough to say I know 100% what's right, to be clear. But it's not for me perfectly, but there is clearly something to be said about what we believe our body is going to experience and what it actually experiences. If that wasn't true, then pharmaceuticals would not have to pass the placebo test. People, it's kind of remarkable, the people that say, oh, I just don't believe in the power of the mind flat out, because I'm like, do you understand that one of the largest industries in the world that pays billions and probably trillions of dollars to operate what they're doing, they want everything to be as good as possible, they have to fight the standard of human belief. That's literally what they do. So I don't know how you could say it's not real. I don't get too far out with it, but 100% I think it is both in alignment with a Dr. Dispenza teaching and even a Christian teaching that your thoughts matter. That's in the Bible. That's in all this stuff. Everything, single one of them agree on what you think seems to have some results for what happens externally. So I absolutely believe in that. Yes.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And you definitely nailed the placebo effect and with pharmaceuticals.
Yep.
It's such a fascinating phenomena that humans have for sure.
Yeah.
So, gosh, Evan, I'm getting a lot out of this, and I love your very organic and very I don't know, self-appointed career path that you've, progressed through, using all the bugs as features in a way. If you are, talking to our audience, is there a message you want them to underline for them that you don't want them to walk away with without hearing before they turn off the pod?
Yes, audience is primarily towards men, right? Not exclusively, maybe, but primarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some women, but I think it's probably 75% men. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I'm sure the women would
Yeah.
appreciate this anyway. So, what I would say is, because I'm an eccentric guy, especially in person, man, I'm not the most hyper masculine, but I'm also not the opposite. And I think the message then to men is there is a balance between what's being taught. There's two camps in today's world. Won't mention names for this. People can use their imagination. There is the hyper red pill where it's like literally like screw women, all of them are out to get you, all that stuff. And it's like you just need to be the best so that you can attract them and dispose of them as you wish. Okay, I don't think we need to do that. Then at the same time, there is an opposing movement that's like, bro, we need to feel everything. And like, dude, you just got to cry with your brother sometimes. I'm not making fun of it per se, but dude, there's something inside of me. Maybe it's just testosterone. Maybe it's something I need to work on. I'm open to that. That does
It's
not feel, that just
being a
doesn't-
man, right? Yeah.
yeah, like that doesn't feel right either. And so I think there's a balance between being able to recognize that I'm having an emotional experience and that I need to work on something versus sitting around for 9 months and just moping about it. And if you have clinical depression, that's different. But it's like, no, I'm not saying that you have to ignore and repress it completely. And I don't think that you have to sit there and feel every little thing either. It's like, when I feel the best as a guy is when I acknowledge the problem and I go and do something about it. I take action. Oh, the bank account's not where I want it to be. Get to work. Don't lose sleep. Don't stay up till 4. Don't stop eating well because that you're working hard, but focus, man. Get off the damn phone, get off the damn social media and get to work. And that you can tell when something's a high versus when it's satisfaction because or fulfillment because you actually feel good about what you're doing. Those methods, that's fulfillment. It's not a high like the video games and the pornography and all that stuff. I would definitely stop that. Do not do that. And that would be the message, especially with a primarily male audience, is I don't think enough people go in the middle and say that there is a middle ground to here. And you don't have to be crazy narcissist and you don't have to be emotional hippie either. Like just be human.
I love that emotional hippie. It's exactly the way Trevor Bowen, the Man Uncivilized podcast creator, he has a book called Man Uncivilized, and he talks about right now we're still up these archetypes of the Marlboro man and that sensitive New Age guy. You just nailed both those, and it's like we kind of need to bring them back to the middle because they both have things that each other need. Like we should be able to access our feminine, but also be able to be a man and do manly things.
Yeah. What's that book again?
Man Uncivilized. It's phenomenal. Trevor Bowen is the guy's name. He has a podcast called Man Uncivilized. He's good buddies with Connor Beaton, who also does the Man Talks podcast.
Thanks.
And they also do retreats with a guy named Dewey Freeman, who was one of the professors at one of my universities, who we all called like Yoda. He's like this amazing elder psychotherapist guy. So they've learned a lot from him, and they're doing really good stuff in the men's space. We should get you on Connor's podcast. That'd be really cool if we could do that. He's a good guy. Yeah, he's really good. I don't know Trevor a lot. I haven't met him yet. I'm going to meet him in October, but I haven't met him yet. But yeah, you definitely nailed that. It's just been split off. It's like people are arguing, no, we need the left hand and not the right. No, we need the right and not the left. And it's like, no, we have two hands for a reason. So thanks for calling that out. I think that's coming back around in men's work a lot. Like the old archetypes are going away, but we're left with this vacuum of like, well, who are you supposed to be? And then everyone's telling us if you're a man, you're toxic. And it's like, well, I can't help that. I'm just being a man. So what is healthy masculinity? And that's kind of one of the things that we're trying to get across in this podcast and kind of flesh out a little bit. So thanks for speaking to that. And then segue to a sort of a darker question related to that. when you're doing the school assemblies, have people asked you about what to do about school shooters, things like that? Does that question come up for you before?
th- Actually, I guess I've been lucky to be spared. I've never been asked that one time. No.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm just curious if, yeah, I would just imagine that if you might at some point. I'm glad that that seems to have gone down in the last few years, but we're still trying to figure out why that's happening. Especially with teenage boys. What's going on there.
Yeah. Well, the Jordan Peterson guy, I like his quote on this. He says, if you think, you know, strong men are dangerous, wait till you see what a weak man does. And it's like that. I mean, I don't pretend to have the answers to that, but I mean, fundamentally, that seems what it is, right? You have a man who's beaten down by society, clearly has severe mental health issues on top of it, and it's this perfect storm for if I do this, it's an expression of like covert narcissism. I think that's so. I think there's different types of narcissists. I know that you would know better than me. I think one of them is covert or something, or vulnerable narcissists, and it's like that's the quiet one that you don't know, but really they want to be seen, and they're very self conscious because they've been beaten down. It's certainly not a justification for anything. I want to be very clear, but usually they have been, and they're going to get that fame by showing all those people, and it's like whoa. And so, I do. I have a great appreciation for the news outlets that actually do not name, and this is just my opinion as a guy now. I'm not an expert on this, so listeners take it for whatever you will. I like the news outlets that have started adopting this idea of we're not going to name these shooters because it's like, hey, why are they doing it? I know one of the reasons has to be because they want to get publicity from it, and they're finally going to show everyone, how special and different they are. And it's like, stop naming them, man, on TV. That's just, oh my God.
1000%. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, that's got to be a factor.
All right, if it's coming from the PhD, it's good. For me, it was just a half-baked opinion, but for him, he's got it.
Fact. Fact now.
We're looking into these things. We are researching these things for sure. I have two lighter questions, but I'll save them for the end. I'll let Josh have the floor.
No, I think that just I appreciate the narration of your experience, Evan, and your ability to use your unique talents and gifts, almost like in an improv fashion to figure out your next move. It's been really great. I think, I love that you said action is the cure for anxiety. And I think the tweak is you have to have the wisdom to know what success feels like. And you've had the tools, and you've mentioned it several times, of checking in with your intuition along the way. Hey, I'm a little bit more optimistic versus depressed, or hey, I'm a little more, my skin's clearing up. Hey, I don't have vertigo anymore, so I'm not dizzy. I mean, I guess that was an easy one to notice. But some of the other stuff, it's a little more subtle. And the fact that you're checking in with yourself, I think that's the golden nugget for me personally. Is I'm a good grinder, and I don't even notice whether or not it's getting me momentum in the right direction or not, unless I have some sort of auditing process sometimes. So checking in on that. Good. I've learned a lot already. Miles, close us down.
Well, we always start this podcast, and we didn't this time, with what we're all listening to music wise, just as like a fun opener. What do you got going? What's playing?
Yeah, I'm lame just in the sense that I'm not a music guy. I don't listen to like new music at all. Couldn't even tell you a song that's come out probably in the last 4 years. I'm sure I've heard it at a mall or something, but I wouldn't know that offhand. I'm a real big audiobook guy and personal development or like YouTube. But if I do have music on, it's almost always while working out or training martial arts. And it is almost exclusively Audio Slave or anything Chris Cornell.
There you go. That's a great answer. What martial arts do you train?
I actually was doing boxing for a while, and then when we moved to North Carolina 2 weeks ago, I just switched that to kickboxing. Because I'm like, you know what? If I got to learn how to use it with the fists, I might as well learn how to use my legs as well. Because I asked the trainer who was training me in boxing, because he was trained in it by his dad for 20 years, and he's a young guy, he's like 25, so he literally started super young. And I said, if you could only do one thing now, knowing what you know. He's like, well, of course I learned kickboxing because I can do everything that I can do in, 5 times more. So I'm like, okay. So if I'm starting from basically square one anyway, that's what I started doing. So that started about a year ago total. And the kickboxing is brand new, and it's nice. It humbles you the first second that you start training. And then it re-humbled me this time when I'm like, this guy's sitting there kicking left and right, showing me his stuff, and then I can't even like balance on one foot yet to do the front kick. So once again, we're starting over, and that's all good.
That is all good. Kind of living in Josh's world. He's in the boxing world. I'm in the jiu-jitsu world.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then last question, you're in Pennsylvania. So I'm an Eagles fan. Is that a no-no or a good for you?
I'm not joking. I'm just a nerd who likes this stuff. I couldn't even tell you who the quarterback is. So it's not that if I had to bet on a team, I'm going to bet on them. I'm not a sports guy either. I don't know. Most of my time is spent learning or listening to something educational.
Yeah, no, okay, I feel stupid now.
Yeah.
I'm just a big Eagles fan, so I like to ask. All right, Josh, what you got?
No, just be, the Eagles fans are dangerous. Just make sure you're not accidentally wearing some other brand while there's a game on. You might have to test out that kickboxing.
That is true. I mean, the Philly stuff is crazy, man. I mean, they'll beat the heck out of you in the lot just for doing something. That I have heard plenty of stories about.
You can't tell if they won or lost. The city still gets destroyed.
Yeah. The only thing I could have told you for real about Philly sports is like, you're right. You don't know. We're going to riot if we win, riot if we lose. I'm like, that's where I disconnect myself. I'm like, I just don't understand what we're doing. Like, we won, we're flipping cars and burning over people's properties. It's like, okay.
That's spoken like a man who's never flipped a car. Okay, do it once, Evan, then come back and talk to me about how much fun it's not. Okay.
Yeah, not in the last decade, at least. Gotta.
I love it.
Awesome, Evan. Well, how do we find you? How do people look you up?
Yeah, so for the speaking stuff, everything's super easy. It's just my name, EvanTransue.com. For everything functional medicine, really recommend going to functionaldiagnosticnutrition.com. I'm sure there's some probably special link with this, and the links that we have for our podcast hosts that bring us on, there's always like some freebie there for you guys or whatever. So definitely check that out. I'll send that over and we'll put it in the show notes. I'm sorry that I don't know that offhand. It's usually something to do with the name of the podcast.
Yeah, we'll put it in our show.
It's fdntraining.com/miles. I'm sorry. I have it right here.
Boom. There we go.
Sick. Good. Free stuff. Rewards. That's what we want. That's really why we did this. Thanks, Evan. We're good here.
It's the perks of hosting a podcast.
Yeah, we'll get everything in the show notes for everybody for sure.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Evan, for taking the time and sharing your story with us. Appreciate it. I learned a lot, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
You got it.
Awesome, man.
We're out.